What's good, Kaneki? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well. We are back with another reaction video. This time it is once again Gary Stevenson. He seems to be out and about on social media a lot. And he is now doing an interview, or he did an interview with LBC. We're going to look at this video where Gary Stevenson says what he would do if he were Rachel Reeves. So Rachel Reeves, for those of you who may not know, she is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Basically, she is in charge of the government spending. She sets the budget and then she taxes all of us for it. So, and I think the US equivalent of the Chancellor of the Exchequer is the US Treasury Secretary. So she is the UK's Scott Bessent. Before we get into this one, please hit the like button, subscribe as well if you're new and you haven't already. And let's listen to what Gary has to say.
And Gary is with me in the studio now. Welcome, Gary. Can you start by taking us right back to when you were, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old, and you're in the East End looking out over the terraced house windows to the Canary Wharf, blinking in the distance?
Yeah, of course. I grew up in Ilford, East London, a little terraced house with my family, crowded little house, you know, playing football on the streets, going the street. And when I was a kid, that's when the Canary Wharf skyscrapers first went up. So we were very poor growing up, but I was always very good at maths. So I think you just kind of assume if you're good at maths, you're going to go work in those skyscrapers one day. So I worked pretty hard. I had a few ups and downs.
I don't think anyone assumes that, but okay.
Got very good grades at maths. Managed to go to the London School of Economics, a very fancy economics uni in London. I entered a card game. Okay. I won a card game, which is where the title of the book, The Trading Game, comes from. So in 2005, I won this card game competition for Citibank called The Trading Game. And that's how I got my job as the youngest trader in the city, starting in the beginning of 2008.
And in this testosterone-fueled environment, you do very, very well. You make a lot of money for the bank and for yourself. And it goes on and on and on. And it's a time when the British economy, like many economies around the world, pretty much flat on its back. Yep. People really, really scared. Homelessness beginning to spread again. A real sense that the world financial system isn't working. And the real reason you're here is for me to ask you how different things are today.
Well, I think it's amazing. So I worked in the aftermath of the 2008 crisis. I started working just before the 2008 crisis started, and I was super young. I was 21, and it was crazy because the specific desk that I worked on in Citibank in Canary Wharf started to make a ton of money during 2008, and obviously this is when the global economy is collapsing. A lot of my friends from university were losing their jobs, but the guys I was working with were making tons and tons of money, and I was 21, and I was kind of desperately trying to figure out what was happening. But I think what is...
So this is what they call the K-shaped economy. The haves get more, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer.
More interesting than the crash itself is how weak the recovery was afterwards. And everybody thought after 2008 that we were going to have this massive economic recovery.
Yeah.
And when COVID was happening, I don't know, it's easy to forget this now, but when COVID was happening, do you remember the Roaring Twenties?
I do.
Do you remember the media saying we're going to have a Roaring Twenties because of pent-up demand? You remember pent-up demand?
It's going to be fantastic.
So for me, sitting and watching COVID, I actually stopped trading for a long time. But when COVID happened, and I heard the economists and people on the news saying there's going to be a Roaring Twenties, all this pent-up demand, I got my laptop out and I started trading again, because what I saw was basically exactly the same thing happening again, which was economic crisis being dealt with in such a way that the government pumps a ton of money in, nearly bankrupts itself. None of that money stays with ordinary...
They are bankrupt. He says nearly, but they are bankrupt. Well, insolvent, but insolvent is like one step away from bankruptcy. You just have to... Well, the government technically can never go bankrupt because they can just print it. And let me just explain what the difference is. So insolvency is when your liabilities, your debts are more than your liquid assets. So liabilities more than assets. You become bankrupt when you are asked to pay those liabilities back. So that's when, even if you liquidate all your assets, you won't have enough to cover your debts. That's when you're bankrupt. But at the moment, the government doesn't have to pay the debt back because people keep loaning the money, so they can just keep sort of paying back with the money they've loaned. So it's a Ponzi, basically. It's a house of cards that's waiting to blow up. They're not yet bankrupt, but they're on the way.
It's being dealt with in such a way that the government pumps a ton of money in, nearly bankrupts itself. None of that money stays with ordinary people. It ends up getting accumulated by the rich. The rich get richer and richer and richer, and ordinary people suffer.
we come back to the quote I started with. Why does that happen? Try to explain to people why the money always ends up with the rich.
The best example is COVID. All right? So do you know what the total government deficit is since the beginning of COVID?
About 100 billion or something?
$1 trillion. It's £1 trillion, which is £20,000 for every adult in the country. It's an unbelievably enormous number. Really, nothing economically matters except for that number because of the enormous scale of that number. We knew at the beginning of COVID, the government was going to pump maybe not $1 trillion, maybe £500 billion into the economy. If you are going to pump £500 billion from the government debt into the economy, you have to ask who is going to end up with that money, who is going to accumulate that money. And the most amazing thing happened during COVID, which was that nobody asked. So I did the analysis, right? Government pumps this money in. Where does it go? Furloughed workers. Do furloughed workers get richer? No. Because they just have to pay, they're not getting their wages anymore, right? They pay their bills, they pay their mortgage, it goes to the owners of the houses, the owners of the companies, rich people.
Which are the banks, ultimately.
Well, ultimately, it's rich people. And what do rich people do with the money during COVID? Nothing, because they can't spend it.
Sorry. On that point, is it the landlord's fault that they bought the house? The landlord also has costs. The landlord also has to renovate. The landlord has to pay the mortgage if they mortgage the house to then rent it out. The landlord still has the costs. The landlord is not the devil in this scenario. They still have the costs that they need to pay down. So it's not like they just got all the rent and put it under the bed. They still had costs to pay.
What you saw during COVID was basically the greatest money laundering trick of all time. £1 trillion was pumped from the government through the poor to the rich.
So sort of liquid money, hot money becomes a solid asset.
Yeah, well, rich people, if you give an ordinary person 10, 20 grand, they're going to spend it. If you give a rich person 20 grand, they're going to buy 20 grand worth of assets. And when I talk about I started trading again during COVID.
Why not? Why not? He says, it's because the people are poor, they have to spend it. But the rich are also technically spending it. They're just choosing not to buy the flashy handbag or the new sports car. Some do spend on the sports car, but by and large, most of the rich people, when they get the money, they invest it. They invest it into their business, they invest it into stocks, they invest it into precious metals, they invest it into real estate. They invest it. That is the difference. That's why they keep getting richer, because the have-nots just get it and they spend it straight away on food. They spend it on luxury items. They spend it on lifestyle. They they rack up credit card debt. So even when they would get that 20,000, they would then have to pay down the existing loans that they have from their credit cards. That's the difference. It's not like buying assets is a bad thing to do. It's fine. You're investing for your future.
The first thing I did was I opened my laptop and I bought £1 million worth of gold. And gold was collapsing.
Let me go back.
20 grand.
You said something important here.
Liquid money, hot money becomes a solid asset.
Yeah, well, rich people, if you give an ordinary person 10, 20 grand, they're going to spend it. If you give a rich person 20 grand, they're going to buy 20 grand worth of assets. And when I talk about I started trading again during COVID, the first thing I did was I opened my laptop and I bought £1 million worth of gold.
Gary Stevenson buys gold. Gary Stevenson buys gold. I think he's going to explain why. This isn't the first interview I've heard him say he has bought gold before, but this is something he and I agree on. So if he and I agree on something, you know that it's probably something you should be doing as well if you can get your hands on some. It can be 1/10 of an ounce or a quarter. You should be getting some gold if you don't have any. But yeah, let him spend it.
If you give a rich person 20 grand, they're going to buy 20 grand worth of assets. And when I talk about I started trading again during COVID, the first thing I did was I opened my laptop and I bought £1 million worth of gold. And gold was collapsing because I knew, this enormous amount of money, £1 trillion, and the US number is, I think, $13 trillion. Once you ask and answer that question, where will the money end up? And you know it's going to be accumulated by the richest people in society. You know straight away gold price will go up. House prices will go up, stock prices will go up, inflation will go up, because that's what these people do. They don't just sit on the money. It's
So
important
this
to
is this is a broken system for ordinary people.
Yeah.
This is a broken system.
It's
You're going
broken.
home to Ilford while this is happening. You're seeing people sleeping out in the streets. You're seeing boarded up houses and so forth. And there comes a point when there's a kind of disgust grows inside you about the system, and you leave and you say, "I'm going to start to campaign for a different kind of economy." So, what is the essence of the better economy that you have as a vision?
I think we cannot accept an economy where wealth inequality grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. I want people to understand that when the rich get richer and richer and richer and richer, and in the last 5 years, that's happened at unbelievable speed, that wealth is not coming out of nowhere. So what we've seen in the last 5 years is this unbelievable increase in billionaire wealth, at the same time as collapsing government wealth, which is why we're having austerity now, collapsing middle class wealth, which is why people can't afford homes. Those two things are connected. We need to fix this tax.
What? What did he just say? What did he just say? Wait.
Out of nowhere. So what we've seen in the last 5 years is this unbelievable increase in billionaire wealth, at the same time as collapsing government wealth, which is why we're having austerity now.
Collapsing government wealth, which is why we're having austerity. My brother in Christ, the government is just spending way too much. It doesn't need to be spending as much as it is. And they're planning on spending even more on defense, on war. They need to cut that war budget. They don't have the funds. It's not popular, but they're going to have to do something about social security and national insurance, pensions, basically. They can't afford it. The future liabilities are much higher than they bring in taxes. So what does that mean? They're going to print. When they print, what does that mean? The price of gold is going to go up. But really, it's not the price of gold going up, it's the currency value going down.
Wealth, which is why we're having austerity now. Collapsing middle class wealth, which is why people can't afford homes. Those two things are connected. We need to fix this tax system, which at the moment taxes ordinary people 30, 40, 50%, and sees billionaires inheriting tens of billions and paying nothing.
And yet we're just hearing this weekend from the government that they can't go for a wealth tax, as Neil Kinnock, for instance, has suggested, because it hasn't worked anywhere. It's been tried in lots of countries. It's never really worked. Therefore, guys, it's off the table.
It hasn't.
If you don't do something about this massive increase in billionaire wealth, which is squeezing wealth out of the rest of society, you have to accept that the middle class will disappear.
It's not billionaire wealth that's squeezing the rest out of society. It is the exorbitant, the incredibly high government taxes that are squeezing the middle class and the working class. I've said it before, but I'll say it again here. Because when you increase taxes on the rich, on the wealthy, they end up leaving. And when they leave, it leaves a massive hole in the government revenue, the revenue from taxes. So they have to increase the taxes on the people who are still in the country, the middle class and the working class. This further siphons money out of the middle class and the working class. I'm laughing, but once again, it is not funny. It is really not funny, but if you don't laugh, you cry. The scary thing is that he is sort of a mouthpiece for the institution, for the government, trying to indoctrinate these ideas to the public, because it basically says, more government intervention, more government taxes.
You have to accept enormous increases in poverty. You have to accept the end of the welfare state. I don't want to accept those things. And I would speak to the government and I would say, listen, you have to be bigger in your ambitions.
So how do you get that money back in practical terms?
The government has to be even bigger. They have to be even bigger. Yes, increase the size of the python that is around the economy. Oh my word.
I don't want to accept those things. And I would speak to the government and I would say, listen, you have to be bigger in your ambitions.
So how do you get that money back in practical terms? What would you do if you were Rachel Reeves?
Well, look, if we look at history, there's only really one case we have where wealth inequality significantly decreased, where wealth was transferred from the elites back to ordinary people. That was the 20th century. That was the aftermath of World War II. What we saw then was a massive transfer of wealth away from the elites towards the government, towards the middle class.
That was high levels of income tax.
Well, really, what it was the war. To be honest, it was the war. It was the war led
Well,
to
we
a
don't want
massive
that. We don't
transfer.
get it.
Exactly, and that is. I'm not calling for a war because I don't want there to be a war. What I want is a fairer taxation system. I want to reduce tax on working people, and I want to increase tax on billionaires.
And you think it is
He's literally just said it. It requires a war. It requires a war. That's what he's saying. And that's what they're doing now. With the increase in war spending, the government keeps pushing this Ukraine, Russia war. They keep pushing for the war in the Middle East. They brought Iran into it now. That's what he's saying. And that's what they're doing. They're pushing for war. Once again, Jared Salente, he said, when all else fails, they take you to war.
And that is. I'm not calling for a war because I don't want there to be a war. What I want is a fairer taxation system. I want to reduce tax on working people, and I want to increase tax on billionaires.
And you think it is possible without sort of the flight of the rich and all the things that we're told about to actually, as it were, take asset value, asset wealth back from the super rich back to the rest of us?
I think it is possible. Yeah, I want to be really clear, right?
It's not.
When I say this, tax the rich, tax the super rich, people often think I'm talking about lawyers, bankers, heaven forbid, even YouTubers and radio presenters. I'm talking about millionaires and billionaires here. I'm talking about individuals and families hoarding enormous amounts of wealth. The thing is, if we were to tax radio presenters, you could go and do this show from Dubai. Mm-hmm. But if I'm going to tax a billionaire, billionaires don't get their money from their work. They get their money from their assets, and their assets are here. Look what happened when the government suddenly decided it wanted to tax Roman Abramovich's assets. Roman Abramovich is on the first plane to Moscow. What does he own? Chelsea Football Club. These people are taxable because their assets are here. And I never said it will be easy. It won't be easy. If you do not tax them, I guarantee you poverty will continue to explode in this country. And I'm not just saying that. I'm betting on it. And I bet on it year after year. And I've made millions of pounds betting on it. And I don't want to be right this time.
The billionaires are not the reason poverty is increasing. It's the government. It's the government and the government's policies. They debase the currency to pay off their existing debts. It makes the debt cheaper. So when they print the currency, the value of everything goes up, housing goes up, stock market goes up. So that's what helps the wealthy get even wealthier. And then the people who don't have any money to pay the increased mortgage fees, they end up having to live on the street. That's how people get homeless. And also, maybe they have a gambling addiction or a drug addiction. They spent all their money on drugs and then they ended up there. Some people are homeless also because they might have lost their house in a bad divorce settlement for these reasons. But by and large, the reason for the rising inequality is not the billionaires. They're just profiting from the system that causes the inequality. They aren't the cause.
Absolutely. Let's just think a little bit about the plight of this government right now, because, they're looking at the need for more cuts in welfare, squeezing the welfare budget, because the bond markets are looking at them and saying, you've lost control of the fiscal situation, therefore we're going to punish you, we're going to push interest rates up,
As
and
they
then you're
should.
scuppered.
Yeah. I
don't
think
wanna
this is what happens when you have...
As they should. The bond market doesn't want to loan money to the government because they can see the fiscal policy is going to drive them further in the black hole. Would you loan money to someone who owes you 500 pounds and they're only bringing in 200 pounds? So that's a deficit of 300 pounds. Would you keep loaning money to that person and they keep spending even though they're only bringing in 200 pounds a month? You wouldn't. So why would the bond market do that? It's like, the laws of economics do not stop just because we're talking about the government.
Bond markets are looking at them and saying, you've lost control of the fiscal situation, therefore we're going to punish you, we're going to push interest rates up, and then you're scuppered. Yeah.
I think this is what happens when you have a naivety towards wealth. I talk about this £1 trillion. This £1 trillion didn't come from nowhere. That £1 trillion is on the government debt now. There's a really interesting graph. The French economist, Thomas Piketty. So for those who don't know, this is a French economist, does a lot of work on wealth inequality. He made these graphs looking at how much wealth the government owns. And back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the government of this country had a lot of wealth. It owned schools, it owned hospitals, and that meant it could provide public services. That collapsed during the 90s and 2000s. And then, during COVID, massively collapsed negative. Where has that wealth gone now? There is a phenomenal naivety about wealth in the economic conversation now. If you do not get that wealth back, you have no choice but to shut the welfare state down, which is why I was screaming at government before the election. I was screaming at the Labour Party, because we knew they were coming in. Listen, you need to do something about taxation. You need to do something about wealth. They were naive to that. They've walked into the situation. They've got no wealth. They're bankrupt. The rich are super rich. They are unwilling to tax them. And now they're left with basically no choice but to shut the welfare state down. Listen, this is what happens if you are naive about wealth. Wealth is hemorrhaging from government, from the middle class to the rich. If you do not stop that flow of wealth, you have no choice but to shut down the welfare state that our grandparents and great-grandparents fought and died for.
So what you want in the end is a political class.
The government has already spent it. That's what the deficit means. The government's already spent it. So anything they tax, they've already spent. The $1 trillion deficit, the government brings in less than that in tax revenue. So they've already spent it. That's what it means. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what it means. It's the government spending. It's not the money they're bringing in. They don't have a revenue generation problem. They have a spending problem.
With a bit of the testosterone, a bit of the cojones, a bit of the aggression that you saw on the trading floor.
A bit of ambition. Yeah. I want to see, you know, when I was working as a trader in Japan, I was complaining about the traders around me, and my junior said, the problem with these traders is they are men with small hearts. And I think that was translated directly from Japanese. But I see too much of that in politics. I want to see ambition. Listen, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, they were born in poverty. 3 of my grandma's siblings died of tuberculosis, a disease of poverty. And they fought for a fairer system, for a better distribution. And that is why me and my parents grew up with a welfare state, housing, education, healthcare, food. They fought for it, and they came from a worse position than us. They knew the importance of distribution and a fair share of the pie. We need to change the tax system, tax working people less, tax the super rich more, tax wealth not work.
Gary, what a thought-provoking, really, really interesting conversation. Thanks very, very much for...
How about don't tax wealth or work? Reduce the size of government. Let the people have more of the money they make. Why? Because you work so that you can build wealth. So what happens if the people you aren't taxing? Okay, Gary, let's play this thought experiment. You don't tax work. Cool. The people who've made their money from their work income end up buying assets. So they end up climbing the wealth ladder to eventually being wealthy. They get to that wealth status, and what do? You tax the wealth. Yeah, so in the end, you build them up just to cut their legs off. And the next generation comes along, you build them up, you cut them off. Next generation, you build them up, you cut them off. At that point, eventually, people are going to stop trying to build wealth. And that's what happened in Soviet Russia. That's what happened in in any country that had communist policies. People just stopped trying to build wealth. Gary, I'm like 60% in agreement with you. Yes, inequality is an issue. Yes, we need to find a way to fix these issues, but it is not done through more taxation. Please, governments, HMRC, what is it? IRS. Stop taxing us. The money isn't yours, it's ours. It's ours to keep. And stop advocating for taxing the rich. We are not entitled to anyone's money. We are not entitled to another human being's money. They've worked for it, they've earned it. You wouldn't want someone to say, "Oh, you give me 50% of the money you make." Like you wouldn't want someone else to say that to you. So why are we saying that to them? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry, I got a bit touchy there. I got a bit angry towards the end because I mean it's just a bit disrespectful to feel this level of entitlement that Gary and those who support his ideas have. I mean, it's just the whole idea about socialism. It's just peak entitlement. It's not something I can co-sign. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like button. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe, share it out, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.